Meet your new go-to for a fresh and inclusive approach to health.
Wellness Rebranded is the pod where a dietitian, a personal trainer, and a mental health therapist combine perspectives to help you redesign your relationship with food, fitness, and your feelings.
Whether we're serving up juicy stories, breaking down the latest research, or dropping practical tips, we'll leave you informed, inspired, and ready to take health-promoting action.
We get you because we are you.
We've joined forces because we know that health isn't one-dimensional, and neither are you.
Tune in for real talk that cuts through the wellness and diet culture hype. Stay for the laughs, the insights, and the feel-good vibes. Hey, everybody. We're so excited to jump into this episode. We have a really cool guest here today who is going to talk about a topic that I know everyone is going to be super interested in. So Jill Castle is the author of the book, Kids Thrive at Every Size. She's one of the nation's premier childhood nutrition experts. She's known for her ability to blend current research, practical application, and common sense. Jill believes that children can thrive at every size. With her paradigm-shifting whole child approach, she inspires parents, healthcare professionals, and organizations that serve children and families to think differently about young people's health and well-being. Jill is the founder and CEO of The Nourished Child, a nutrition education website and podcast for parents. She's the author of books including Eat Like a Champion, Try New Food, The Smart Mom's Guide to Starting Solids, The Smart Mom's Guide to Healthy Snacking, and co-author of Fearless Feeding. Jill's also the mother of 4 adult-ish children and lives in Massachusetts with her husband. I'm chuckling because I'm also have adult-ish children. That's a good way of putting it. But welcome to the pod, Jill. We're so excited for you to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love your book, and I'm so excited to talk about this. But I want to start by just asking you what inspired you to write this book and take this topic on?
What inspired me to write this book? I feel like this book has been born out of many years of working with families, hearing what they are worried about, observing the paradigms that have been developed around the medical model and the psychological model around keeping kids emotionally well and physically healthy, and oftentimes observing a polarization between these two schools of thought, if you will. And for me, as you know, as a mom who's raised 4 kids, but more importantly, as a healthcare professional that's worked with families, there's a lot of nuance in working with kids. There's a lot happening and going on, and parents very much want to help their kids without hurting them. And so the helping is, I want them to be physically healthy. I want to set them up for the most healthful future I can. The harming part is the emotional well-being part. I don't want to hurt their psychological development. I don't want to sacrifice their emotional well-being so that I can have them be healthy. I thought about this for a long time. And you were probably, witness to this, Elizabeth, a little bit of this sort of the angst I felt between this back and forth. It's got to be either this way or it's got to be that way. And it just hit me one day. I was like, you know what? I've always focused on habits with kids, always. And there's so much evidence that supports both physical health and emotional well-being when we look at some of these, what I call pillars of wellness. To me, it became so obvious that the best way to move forward, to be in the middle, to care for both ends of the spectrum, was to do it through establishing habits and attitudes that support both physical and emotional well-being.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me because you talk about the whole child. In my practice, I talk about whole health, which is essentially the same thing, that it's your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. It is like this push-pull going on between two ends of the field, if you will. But I thought you did a really interesting job of laying out the sort of fixed size crowd versus the embrace size crowd and what's happening there. Can you talk a little bit about that and share kind of where you come in?
Yeah, I think what's happening there is that a lot of parents are getting confused. At the end of the day, parents want to understand how they can raise kids who are healthy and, doing well, feeling good about the bodies that they're in. And they're at a loss for how to navigate a lot of the cultural norms that they're facing every single day. These societal norms that say your body has to look like that, or it has to look like this. And health is so important. And this is what health looks like. And this is what healthy looks like. And this is what fitness looks like. This is what well-being looks like. And there's a lot of nuance for families. It can look very different from one family to the next family. And how I came into sort of this scene is probably more of an outsider than an insider. I would say, over 30 years of practicing as a pediatric dietitian, the early decades of my practice were very much physical health focused, as many of us were, in our field were trained that way. I would say in the last decade, it's very apparent that, kids have a lot of pressure, a lot of stress. There's rising mental health concerns. And some of that injury or that harm is caused by us, the very people who are trying to help. I think through COVID went through this phase of, really questioning how we were approaching it, how I was approaching sort of my advice. And like many of us who try to educate online or in the social media realm, the nuance is so lost sometimes. And you mentioned, yes, I am in private practice. And one of the things I love about private practice is that you dig into all the nuance. You get very specific with a child. But in terms of writing this book and how I came into this, I knew that I needed to provide sort of a path forward that was, yes, applicable to families, but also applicable to healthcare providers, because many of us aren't feeling great about the approaches that are out there, the either or approaches. You're either in one camp or you're in the other. And so many healthcare professionals really appreciate both camps, like myself. And so how can we be in both camps and move forward that way?
Sound familiar, Tara?
So familiar. I feel like that's something that I've been like reconsidering on a daily basis. And Elizabeth, I know we talk about this all the time, how both of us are feeling like there's a middle ground that's not being talked about. So I'm like thrilled to hear you address this.
Yeah. One of the things for me is, we talk about like sometimes we get in the conversation about the ethics of everything. It doesn't feel ethical to knowingly harm a child by the language I use or the approaches I use. And I say I as a collective we, but it also doesn't feel good to not help a child who needs help with their physical health. That doesn't feel good either. And so again, there is the nuance, but I believe there can be a way forward by not focusing on the way a child looks, their appearance, their size, their numbers on the scale, their percentiles on the growth chart, because oftentimes, and this has been my experience, I don't have any research that I've done that supports this, but in my own personal experience, when children and their families adopt these lifestyle behaviors and attitudes, things kind of settle where they're going to settle. And we can embrace where that place is and be happy with it. And I find a lot of parents are ready for that. They are so ready for that.
Yeah, I so agree. And it is impossible to address the nuance in kind of social media or how you're chatting with people in these kind of short blips of time. And same, I don't work with children, I work with adults, but it often frustrates me when people hear what I'm saying and it sounds extreme to say we don't have to focus on weight. We don't have to focus on size. And health and weight aren't the same thing. And it sounds so radical from what people are used to hearing. And I think people kind of take it that way, but really all I'm saying is let's focus on healthy behaviors. Those are the things you have the most influence and control or have any influence and control over anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that they're impactful and it really isn't radical at all. It's super simple, but somehow in the polarized environment, it kind of feels radical to some people to say it that way.
Yeah.
Social media the other day said that a lot of like coaches, dietitians, doctors, people like that kind of struggle with social media because the answer to like almost everything is it depends,
Yeah,
right? And that
so
doesn't
true.
make good social media content. So I feel like as I'm listening to this conversation, I'm like, yeah, I totally get why social media is hard for the four of us because everything is so nuanced that it doesn't fit on a cute Canva graphic, you know?
It does not. And it's frustrating because a lot of parents see those cute little 3 sentence explanations and they think that that's what it is for their child. And this is the thing with private practice, right? You get to really know these families and these children, and they're different. They all come to the table with different backgrounds and physical, genetic, emotional makeup. And, you could have a public health recommendation. Yeah, but in your family and your child's temperament and your child's sort of approach to food or what have you, there may be differences in recommendations. And we just don't get that on social media.
Just for the sake of our listeners, in case they're asking the same things I have in my mind right now, I need clarification. Jill, you were saying the lifestyle behaviors and attitudes. What are we referring to exactly? Day-to-day examples for those of us who are not dietitians, and maybe we are in the midst of, we do one thing one day because it's what we heard, the other day it doesn't resonate, so we try something different. So it's like this, what are we doing? And we don't even know what to do next.
Right. So the habits and attitudes are really what I call the 8 pillars of wellness. And they include family culture, sleep, movement, feeding, eating, food, screen time, and self-love. So with family culture, the whole goal is to build a supportive, accepting family unit that is cohesive and communicates and embodies the family values through a mantra or meetings or a manifesto, which I help to outline in the chart. But particularly for children who are growing up in larger or smaller bodies, we know that they need more support from their family unit. The research has proven this out. When they don't get sort of that unconditional acceptance and love and support, particularly around some of these social cultural norms, we know they don't do as well as those kids who are supportive. So that first pillar of wellness really sort of sets the tone around helping parents role model the behaviors they want to see in terms of lifestyle behaviors like sleep and screens and eating habits and things like that. But it also really emphasizes the family unit as the most important culture a child will grow up with in their lifetime. It is the most influential one. The sleep pillar, the goal for that is really building sleep hygiene. So we oftentimes think, oh, my kid got 11 hours of sleep or 10 hours of sleep, and that's good. Well, it could be good if they're getting good quality sleep during that time, but many kids are going into their beds and they're laying there with their computers or their iPads, and they're really not getting good quality, solid sleep for the duration that we know is good for their physical health and their emotional well-being. We know that with sleep, children grow overnight. That's when growth hormone is secreted at the most intense rates. And so good quality sleep is important to physical health. It's also the time when we repair, any damage that's been done to our bodies. If you're an athlete and you muscle breakdown, that's when you're repairing your muscles. But we also know sleep is really key to emotional regulation, processing your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions. And that's key to well-being as well. We also know it's key to regulating your appetite, regulating your behavior during the day, learning, memory. So there's so much about sleep as a health habit or a lifestyle behavior that is so key to children. It's key to all of us, right? But in childhood, we're particularly looking at cultivating these behaviors over time. So movement, we know, helps the body function physically, right? It helps us process what we eat during the day, but it also helps us grow and build strength. And we know the research in children in terms of physical movement helps their blood pressure, helps them clear lipids from their bloodstream. There's just a whole host of like physical benefits of movement every day. But we also know it builds confidence in kids. When kids go out and have fun and they play, they also secrete endorphins that make them feel good. And then they oftentimes feel more confident in their bodies. And so we're striking, again, many of these pillars are striking two outcomes: physical health and emotional well-being. The feeding pillar, very important. We know it's that interaction between the parent and child around mealtime, around snack time, any kind of food environment time. Parenting around food, such as controlling food, that's a feeding style. Being permissive with food, that's another feeding style. We know these feeding styles and these feeding practices build a child's relationship with food or shapes it. And so much of the way we feed reflects how we were fed as children. And so parents are bringing this to their family table, if you will, and helping parents really get to a positive place with feeding, acknowledge what influences from childhood or current influences might be impacting their feeding, including the size of their child. That impacts feeding and how parents approach their children with feeding. And so that pillar really aims to help parents get in a good place, a positive place with interacting around food so that their children build that good relationship with food. The eating pillar is all about building good eating habits. I start that chapter out with just exploring why kids eat. We know they eat for physical reasons. We have the appetite cycle and the hunger cues and the fullness cues, and that shapes a lot of why and when and how much they eat, but also what we call hedonism, which is, the pleasure you get from food. We also know kids eat for other behaviors like boredom, loneliness, avoidance, habit, situations that they're in. And so, helping children develop appetite regulation is really the goal of that pillar, through identifying the different reasons why children eat and also shaping mindful eating for them over time.
You do a really good job of kind of breaking out those 4 different reasons, behind people's eating. And I would love for you to just chat about how a parent can use that information. Like if you know that your child is, likely not physically hungry because they just had a huge meal and then they're going to the pantry and, looking for something fun. Okay, you might know that that's not physical hunger, but then what? How do you use that information?
That's a great question. So all parents who are watching their children head into the pantry shortly after a meal kind of understand that their children are not hungry. And so it's a time and place to be curious, like, why is this a habit? And that's what the BLAS test is. Mostly kids are eating for boredom, habit, loneliness, avoidance, situation. And so it's really like doing the BLAS test, which I outline in the pillar, giving parents sort of some quick actions that they can take. Are you bored? Let's go find something to do, right? Whether it's let's go outside, let's go to a friend's, take the dog for a walk, go do a chore. Are you lonely? Let's connect. Are you avoiding? So some children are avoiding emotions. And that piece, again, I'm not a psychologist. Maria, you could probably weigh in on this, but emotion coaching is something I touch on as a tool that parents can learn and develop to help their children vocalize or identify what their emotions are and help them perhaps connect it to their eating behavior. Sometimes it's habits. Kids are going to the pantry out of a habit. Let's reframe this habit. The kitchen's closed, or we're not having more to eat. The meal is over, or whatever, sort of boundary that a parent might need to put up. Then there's situational. Kids do eat when they're in certain food abundant environments, and helping children navigate those, oftentimes preparing them ahead of time for what they're going to see and having a conversation about how that might play out and what might happen and what options they have. It's not a conversation about you can't have that and don't you dare touch the dessert table while you're there. It's not that. It's a collaborative conversation. And I really try to hit on that throughout the entire book, because we get a lot more mileage with our kids when we're collaborating with them on these things and opening up these topics for conversation. So I do give quite a bit of sample dialogue in the book for ways parents can handle these conversations and things that they can say. One of the things I think is really important for parents, and it's come up a lot, it comes up a lot in my practice, is understanding that there's a genetic underpinning also for eating behaviors. And I think that we don't talk enough about this, but just like we inherit genes for our size, we also inherit genes for our appetite. And so some children will inherit the genes of being food responsive. So food responsivity is just heightened awareness and attraction to food. And it's just hardwired. We've got plenty of research that shows us this. There are also children who are satiety responsive. They're more aware of their fullness signals. They're more aware of feeling full, and that may curtail their eating earlier than sometimes adults feel is appropriate. And then of course there's intuitive eating, which I don't get into that much in the book because I feel like there's a lot of great resources out there on that anyways. But at the same time, I feel like what parents can do around eating is build in that mindfulness. I think a lot of parents want their kids to be intuitive, but I don't think the intuition comes later in childhood until you are really building mindfulness first, because so many kids, because of the blahs, can be disconnected with their appetite signals.
I feel like this is a really good time to say that Elizabeth has a great course on raising intuitive eaters that has totally changed the way that I feed my child. So if
Awesome.
anyone out there is listening and they need more help on that particular topic, Elizabeth is a fantastic resource for that.
Awesome.
Okay, so what if you are like, I would love to throw out a couple scenarios. And Tara has a very young child. Maria has more adolescent age children. I'm sure they can give some real life scenarios, but I think it would be awesome to like get you to weigh in on a real thing. So let's say you are, I'm going to throw one out first, but your child is maybe like 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe somewhere around there. You're noticing that, they've generally been a relatively good eater, but they're getting into those teenage years and you're noticing their eating habits just totally shift and you feel like you have less influence because of their age. What do you recommend to parents in that scenario who are worried? I'm really worried about how my teenager is eating.
Yeah. So if you were my client, I would probably go down first the rabbit hole of teen development and explain to you that teenagers are independent seekers. They're up for adventure. They love risk. And food plays very well into that. They can make their own decisions, independent decisions. And some of them are driving through the drive-through or heading to the coffee shop and, getting what they want. And that's very supportive and aligned with where they are developmentally. One of the other things I recommend to parents, this is not the time for you to take your foot off the gas pedal and relinquish all your duties for making meals and snacks and having, nutritious foods ready. Teens are also, while they are looking for their independence, they're not necessarily going to start cooking for themselves and choosing healthy foods unless they're readily available. When they are oftentimes very happy to receive interesting food that looks and tastes good for them. So I'm always encouraging parents to not give up the rhythm, not give up the routine around meal prep and snacks, and to talk with your teen about what they would like to have available. I remember when my teens were younger and I used to pack lunches for them every day for school. And when they went to high school, they were like, we don't want our insulated packs. We don't want freezer packs anymore. We want a brown paper sack. And I was like, well, how can I pack a good meal for you if it's a brown paper sack? That means a peanut butter sandwich. And we had to get really creative and talk through like, okay, I want to honor your brown sack, but I also want you to have a good meal that's going to nourish you while you're at school and make you feel good. And so it really just comes down to, again, collaborative conversations from I'm worried about what you're eating. You don't even have to say that. You could say to your teen, I'm noticing that you're not here for dinner that much anymore. Or when I make dinner, you prefer to go out with your friends. There's a conversation around the finances related to that. There's a conversation around, I'm the person who's making this meal, and out of respect for me, I would love to see you partake in it. There's a conversation around, this is the only time we get together as a family. It's a strong value of our family, and I really want to see you at the table. There's a lot of different angles that you could use with a teenager, and it really depends on the relationship you have with your teenager and the kinds of conversations that will resonate with them. And I do believe every parent, they know their kid, they know their teens, they know what is going to work with their child. And I would encourage parents to lean into that.
I'm laughing a little bit because when I was in like middle school and high school, I would take an apple for lunch every day and I would put it in a brown paper sack. And that was the only thing in the sack. And I had a friend who was like, "What the heck is the point of brown paper bag, dude? Like, the point of the bag is to hold your lunch together, and you literally have an apple." Which, by the way, I also bought a pack of Ho-Hos and chocolate milk every day. So I covered none of the food groups except carbs.
You got two of them.
Maybe
fruit
some
and milk
too. But it probably wasn't the meal that I needed to fuel myself as like a high school athlete. But that's what I did like almost every single day. So I totally get the stubbornness of like, oh, I'm going to use a brown paper bag and I'm not having that stupid lunchbox. And, I'm not going to eat this thing because none of my friends are eating it and it's not cool. Like, I get it. It's a tough time of life.
I think a lot of times dinner is that one meal where we can somehow regroup. Not every night necessarily, but if families can find a few nights a week where they can regroup with their teenager. Most teens that I know, when they sit down to a table with a meal that is attractive, tasty, and nourishing, they're willing to eat and they're willing to stay there and consume that meal with their family. So you're not going to have, as a parent, jurisdiction over every environment they're in. You have to trust them, and you have to trust yourself that you've done the good work of parenting through the years, and rely on that. Trust that, your values, the habits that you've taught them along the way, how to balance a meal, how to get their needs met, whether they're an athlete or not an athlete. I mean, I remember when I was a teen, I used to have these big, huge yeast rolls that were homemade in the cafeteria. And that's what I had for lunch every day. $1. It cost me $1. That's what I could afford. And I had a big old yeast roll every day. And then I went off to basketball practice. I don't know how I did it. I mean, I talk with all my teenagers now, and that is not the conversation. And I think with teenagers, you have to kind of enter into the conversation around the areas that are meaningful to them. So for an athlete, performance is a meaningful topic for them.
So I'm the mother of a 4-year-old, and he's a pretty good eater ever since I took Elizabeth's course. He eats like a pretty wide variety of foods, and I don't have to like beg him to eat or not eat. Like, he's really good at letting me know his hunger and fullness cues. But he's not eating a lot of fruits and veggies. Like, we get sugar snap peas in there. We like peas. We like pears. And everything else is real hit or miss. We're really big into the let's take one bite of an apple stage and then be like, I'm done. What help do you have for me there?
Yeah, no, I get this question a lot, and it's probably an answer you've heard before, but it's really exposure. For toddlers and preschoolers, it's about fun and it's about exposure and a little bit of autonomy if you can. I often tell families, if you want your child to eat all these different vegetables, they have to show up. They have to show up on the table at some point or another in different shapes and different preparation methods. That does not mean that you have to offer 10 different vegetables a week and saute this and bake that and roast that. But it's over time in the context of positive, pressure-free mealtime environment, just bringing different things to the table and modeling that you enjoy them and you're eating them, and asking them if they'd like to have a taste or to try it. And if they don't, you let that go and you try again another time a few weeks down the road. It's just the pressure thing is counterproductive to kids eating or trying anything. Although I will say that some children have the temperament where they are pleasers and they will do whatever their adults in their lives ask them to do. But I really like for kids to be able to accept or reject and not be punished for it or made to feel bad because they said no to something. There's a lot of opportunities to introduce lots of different things. So the key is keep having an adventure with it. Take them to the grocery store, let them pick out a vegetable, a fruit for the week. Let them help you prepare it. There's lots of things that you can do with young children to engage their interest. And that is really developmentally the key, is having them engage with the food, helping you cut it up, helping you tear the lettuce, helping you do some of the preparation. They feel they have ownership in it and they're more likely to try those foods. At least that's what the research says.
We've been growing a garden and we've had sugar snap peas in it. So up until this point, he was like not about those. But now that he can like pick his own off the vine and like open them up and eat the little peas inside, he's like much more willing to try them when they're available.
As you guys are talking, is making me think so much of it comes down to understanding what your role is as a parent and what the goal is, right?
Mhm.
And I think to me, when I was reading the book, you helped do a really good job of separating those two things out. I think a lot of times as parents, we think it's our job to get our children to eat or to
Yeah.
make sure that they only, eat all the healthy foods. And we can't make them eat any more than we can make any other human eat or not eat certain foods. I think where your book comes in also is like reframing the goal. What's the goal?
And I also think giving parents a variety of tools to get to that goal. I don't think I come off in this book as it's my way or the highway. I'm MapQuest. There are a lot of routes to help, raising a child who's physically healthy and emotionally well. Here's the map, or here are the different routes, and pick the one that works for you and your family. And that's also at the end of the book, I break down every pillar to be, you're starting out, you're a learner. You've done a little bit of this habit, you've put a little bit of this in place. You're a striver, you're on the right track. There's some things you can do to up level that habit. You've nailed it. Like, your kids are sleeping great. You have great sleep hygiene. You don't need to spend a lot of time on this habit. You've nailed it. You're a thriver. So let's spend our time and effort in the areas where we need to.
I'd love to go back to the pillars for a second, because I thought it was so interesting how you did it, where you had feeding, eating, and food. Talk to us about why you felt the need to break those up into 3 different pillars, and then what the food one is.
Sure. So feeding is very much a parental role. Eating is a child's role, right? And I definitely wanted to separate those two things. And food, quite frankly, I think it was the hardest chapter to write, not gonna lie. And I think it's always, this is my 6th book. The food chapter is always the hardest, because I feel like I am, and I feel like a lot of people are much more sensitive to the cultural differences and preferences of individuals, the socioeconomics of individuals. And so I was really challenging myself, and my editor, quite frankly, was challenging me to speak about food in a different way, in a way that I haven't spoken about it in other books that I've written. And so I was like, well, I've always used a nutrient lens. I always am like, we can really get very granular if we're keeping our eye on nutrients. And that's how I ended up talking about it. Highly nutritious, decently nutritious, and minimally nutritious. I didn't want to dive into ultra processed, junk, toxic. All that stuff is just like leads you down this path of shaming food. And when you're shaming food in front of a child, that child is inevitably going to be feeling that shame because they either like those foods or they eat those foods. And so I really wanted to get away from that and put food in sort of the context of, yeah, you want balance, but mostly nutritious foods, right? Mostly decently and highly nutritious foods. And it doesn't mean minimally nutritious foods are out the window, but they're not going to make up the lion's share of the diet. So how do you sort of figure out your balance? Again, for each family, it's going to be different. That's how the food chapter sort of evolved.
I'm curious how you talk about it that's different than how you've talked about it in the past, especially because I think it highlights how we're all always learning and growing.
Mm-hmm.
There's no shame in that.
Well, I think certainly I've talked about it in the past, based on the food groups and the My Plate icon. I hint to that or refer to that in this chapter too. I think what I really tried to showcase is that people think about food very differently, and you can frame food in a lot of different ways. You never know how it's going to land for an individual family. I used to talk about food balance as 90-10. And I still have a strong belief that, we are aiming for some level of balance that's mostly nutritious for children, but it needs to be enjoyable, right? And I've never been an eliminator. I've been an adder. If you want a healthier diet, just keep adding in healthier food, nutritious foods. I also got away from talking about healthy versus unhealthy and really tried to lean into nutritious as sort of my key word. And again, nutrient lens being sort of the definer of that. And teaching parents that we know there are nutrients that are satiating for kids. And if we can build those into meals and snacks, we can really stay ahead of hunger and we can really help them regulate their appetite with these nutrients. And so there is research behind that. When we add protein and fiber, not to go overboard with those nutrients, but when they are present in meals and snacks, kids are satisfied. They can go for the proverbial 2 to 3, 4 hours in between meals and snacks. And so to me, that's a tool that can help parents be successful.
This is an episode packed with so much good information. It's great. Before we wrap up, if we would summarize, what would be your biggest takeaways that you would like our listeners to take with them today? What would those be?
I would love listeners to know that healthy doesn't have a size. Your health is not defined by your size, and that children can learn and adopt habits that help them grow up healthy, but also grow up feeling good in the bodies that they're in. And parents can cultivate these habits with knowledge and tools and a reasonableness that is sensitive to the individual child that they have.
I love that.
Thanks.
It feels so logical. Like, why is that not the norm,
I know. Let's make it the norm. Let's bring some sensibility back here.
I totally agree. Well, I guess it's also a bit of a teaser because we didn't get through all 8 of your pillars, but they are all equally important. And so people can buy your book. Tell us what it's called again.
It's called Kids Thrive at Every Size: How to Nourish Your Big, Small, or In-Between Child for a Lifetime of Health and Happiness. And you can get it anywhere books are sold: Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, independent bookstores. It is out there.
And where can people find you, Jill? Where's the best place to connect with you?
I have 2 websites, jillcastle.com and thenourishedchild.com. The Nourished Child's more educational articles and some products and courses. I also have a podcast called The Nourished Child, and you can find me anywhere. Just even Google my name, you'll be able to find me.
And you are a wealth of resources and information and knowledge and wisdom and experience, frankly, also for feeding children. So I definitely would encourage anyone who has questions about those things to head your way.
Thank you for having me. It's great to talk and be with you guys today.
Thank you for listening. If you want to connect with me outside of this podcast, you can find me on Instagram at coaching_therapist.
I'm Elizabeth. You can find me at Elizabeth Harris Nutrition or in my Facebook group, Health and Healing with Intuitive Eating.
And I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Tara DeLeon Fitness. Guys, if you loved this episode or any of our other episodes, we would love it if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcast. It really, really helps us get the non-diet word out to the rest of the world. So please leave us a review.
Yes, thank you.